Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh or anywhere you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat, and we're getting ready for the start of the 2024-25 season. Horwat, this is our final episode in August, which means starting next week, we are in the same month as Prospect Challenge. We're in the same month as Penguins training camp, and we're in the same month as, if I may be so bold, Sidney Crosby's contract extension. So it is an exciting time in Penguins land. It's an exciting time around the NHL as players start to get back into their home cities, but we have plenty to discuss today, including the beginning of our training camp preview, where we name a couple dark horses to make the roster out of training camp. And then we'll celebrate goalie week, because that's what the NHL is doing on social media. We'll celebrate it by ranking all the goaltending tandems of the Metropolitan Division. Where do the Penguins stand? And then we'll close things out by reacting to Rutger McGroarty's first presser as a member of the Pittsburgh Penguins and the news of his new number. Let's get started. And let's start things off with the beginning of what is going to be our ramp up to Pittsburgh Penguins training camp, which should be just about 3 weeks away from today. You have the opening of the preseason on September 21st against the Buffalo Sabres. You have the Prospect Challenge a week prior to that between September 13th and 16th. So we have training camp right around the corner. Perfect time to start previewing it. And with the fact that there's going to be plenty of roster battles, I think that the best place to start is to look for some dark horses to keep your eyes on that could surprise some people this year. There were a couple last year. One of them coming in at the very last second being Jansen Harkins. Now, it didn't work out for the Penguins in that one, but are there any dark horses, or specifically one dark horse that you see on this roster right now?
There's a couple. I think the way the roster is lined up, the way the depth chart is looking, there's plenty of log jams all over the place. Guys that can't fight for roster spots, guys that can fight for those first man up and tap those first man up spots. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of battles that'll be happening to the point of I forgot some of these players were even on the Penguins roster and in the system or whatever it may be. And one of those names is absolutely a dark horse to make the roster because he had a good showing in his handful of games last year, and that's Jesse Puljujarvi. I know the way we've been discussing the Penguins all offseason, we've been talking about key faces that could make the lineup, that could fight their way into the lineup. And never in my mind through those discussions have I been like, Jesse Puljujarvi is still on this team until yesterday, essentially, when you texted me his name. And I went, oh, yeah, he's still on this team. So I'm going to go with him because, yeah, he's someone that could sneak into this roster one way or the other. He had a good showing last year. Don't have the numbers in front of me, but he looked good. He was passing the eye test every time he was out there, one way or the other. It will just be interesting to see if he's able to, improve and impress and move his way up the depth chart, because there are a ton of names ahead of him. I mean, a ton of NHL names that the front office went out and got. Like, I know Kevin Hayes is a center, but it's another forward in the way. Cody Glass, another forward in the way. And then the guys that are still around, Lars Eller, Noel Acciari, forwards in the way of taking up these bottom six roster spots that Puljujarvi would likely take. I get Puljujarvi could also sneak into a top six role if need be. But that seems like a long shot at this point. So when it comes down to it, if Puljujarvi can impress, that's a sneaky choice, a dark horse candidate that can maybe impress enough during training camp and the preseason to earn himself another role.
Yeah, you're right. He has kind of faded into the back with all the moves that have happened. And it's not just the fact that the Penguins have a lot of these guys. They do have a lot of centers. That's, I think, where they're most stockpiled, where the biggest log jam is. But I think with that, you're seeing a lot of these centers, especially in everybody's projected lineups, get bumped over, right? Noel Acciari was a given. Everybody said that Noel Acciari is better at wing, so he should bump over the wing. That's expected. But a guy like Kevin Hayes, if they end up wanting to go with Cody Glass at center, Kevin Hayes can bump over and play the wing. So it's going to be tough for Puljujarvi to make the roster. And here's the thing that I said yesterday about him, though. Last year, the finishing is what it is, right? He's going to struggle finishing. That's what he's struggled with his entire career. everything leading up to that point, he did a pretty good job of. And he did it in a way that Mike Sullivan likes. Now, he had to ramp up slowly because he was coming back from a pretty significant surgery in the previous offseason. But I thought whenever he was finally like 100%, and there are reports of him saying that, hey, he wasn't necessarily 100% throughout that season, that he's still battling back, still trying to get back to where he feels is his best game. But when he got back to his best last year, I thought he was really good for the Penguins. And again, we'll see what he's able to do. There are a lot of new faces that are going to get opportunities as well. But I like that one. I think that's a name that a lot of people have forgotten about throughout this summer, and it should make an impact and should make an impression early in training camp. I have two for you here, and let me start with the forward since you went with forward. I'm going to say Sam Poulin. It is a do or die season for him, and he is another name that, with all of these additions, has kind of gotten put on the back burner. I mean, there were people last week, I think you included, that whenever the Rutger McGroarty trade first came down and we didn't know the return, said, well, it just makes sense that Sam Poulin would be going the other way, right? I mean, he's still a decent prospect, a prospect that has kind of not lived up to the first round moniker, the first round expectations, but still somebody who, at his best, was very good at the AHL level last year and hasn't really been given that opportunity at the National Hockey League level. The Penguins are overstocked at center, so this probably needs a trade of a Lars Eller or a Nola Chari to create a little bit more of some space and a little bit more of an opportunity. But I think Sam Poulin could come into camp, and if he does as well as he did last year, especially early in camp last year, I could see him climbing up that depth chart and maybe squeaking himself onto this roster.
It's a tough one to fill, but yes, I think it's do or die season for him. I mean, it feels like it has been for the last 2 or 3 years, but it truly is this time around because got the 3 games 2 years ago. He got 3 more games last year, and now it is time to set yourself apart. That the prospect graduation happened last year. It's time to prove what kind of hockey player you're going to be, what kind of professional hockey player you're going to be. Is it a regular in the NHL, or is it going to be, maybe he gets bounced around the league a little bit. Maybe there's just an AHL career ahead of him. It's just that time to make that decision and prove that you were worthy of being a regular NHLer. And at the moment with the Pittsburgh Penguins, it's going to be a tough battle to work through with all these names that we keep mentioning. I'm sure there's still more that we're missing and forgetting about, because it's tough to have this kind of conversation, not have the list of every name in front of you, which I can get any second, but just rolling with, some of the, because even when you're looking at it, some of them don't stand out, but then you look at Sam Poulin's name and you go, he should be standing out because of the first round draft choice, because of the way the Penguins have, looked at him over the last few years. It's time for him to make that jump. It is time for him to rightfully earn a spot. It's just, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. It's just time for him to take control of his moment and act on, what everyone's been waiting for from him.
Yeah, regardless of if he makes the roster out of camp or not, he needs to make an impact at the NHL level at some point this season. I mentioned it's do or die for him. He needs to be able to, and when he's given the opportunity, and hopefully he's given more of an opportunity than, last season he had 3 games played. The year prior he had 3 games played, but he was drafted 5 years ago now. He was in the 2019 NHL draft. You got to at some point make that jump, and he's been a very good AHLer the last couple of seasons. He needs to make that jump to the NHL and prove that he could be a piece for the Penguins' bottom 6 for the short-term future. Another name that I'm going to throw out here, last one before we move over and talk about some goaltenders on goalie week across the NHL. I see Ryan Shea as a dark horse again. Last year, a little bit of a surprise that he made the roster. This year, I think it's going to be the same way. The staff has familiarity with him. A lot of people like to give credit to Jack St. Ivany down the stretch of last season and how good he was on that third pairing. Well, a big part of that was he was playing with Ryan Shea as well. Shea had a good end of the season as well, and I think most people can agree the future is a little bit brighter for a guy like Jack St. Ivany than it is for a guy like Ryan Shea. But as we've talked about, Jack St. Ivany's waivers exempt. That might lead into the fact that he starts the season in the AHL. I wouldn't like to see it. You wouldn't like to see it. But it is a possibility that we should be aware of. I see Ryan Shea as a guy that the Penguins could look at and say, well, that's a decent 7th defenseman that we could have on the NHL roster to start the season. I don't think he starts the season on the left side, simply because you look at that left side, it seems like it's pretty much set with Grzelcyk, Pettersson, and Ryan Graves. But Shea is somebody who played both sides last year. and he could potentially be that sixth defenseman on the right side, or I think he's best fit, and I think his best chance to make this team is that extra defenseman, that seventh defenseman role, as you like to call it, the Chad Ruhwedel Memorial position and the Chad Ruhwedel Memorial chair up in the press box.
Yeah, something like that. However, I spit it out the other day.
Yeah.
Yeah, the depth defensive position is just another one where there's all kind of traffic. I mean, even by alleviating some of it by dealing away, or losing P.O. Joseph, there's still a ton of names that can take those spots because they subtracted one, but then added like four. Matt Grzelcyk's going to take up, obviously, be part of the top three easy on whatever side he's on that left. Ryan Graves, same thing, going to take up those roles. And then it's going to be tough to find your way in and squeak your way in when there's one spot to work with. It's a ton of names fighting for one spot. I mean, you mentioned Jackson Ivey. Ryan Shea can be in that conversation. John Ludwig can be in that conversation. Throw in, if you really wanted to, a Philip Kral, a Mac Hollowell. These are all names that, if they impress enough, thanks to their age, because they're a little bit younger too, could step in and find roles, add some youth to the depth, and build toward, getting into that lineup now and building it down the line. Ryan Shea, I don't know if he's going to be a dark horse to me. I'm actually a little surprised they brought him back in the first place because of how many other names they brought in. But if he comes in and performs the way he did at the end of the season, by all means, this is the same position he entered the organization last year, sort of as, and not an unknown name at this point, but an unknown name to the Penguins organization. Definitely started pretty far down the totem pole, but worked his way through training camp and through the preseason to be, a healthy scratch, but in the NHL lineup opening night. He's in that same position again. He impressed enough. It's just a matter of doing that again. Second time around for him. Maybe he just knows what to do now. So it'll be an interesting choice with Ryan Shea. I think maybe he's once again lower down the totem pole, like I said, but we know he has the ability to climb it.
Yeah, he had a good camp last year. He can recreate that this year and probably make the roster, especially with that familiarity, which I think gives him a little bit of an advantage over, as you mentioned, a Mac Hollowell, a Philip Kral, even a Nikolai Nizov, who was brought in on a PTO late last week on that left side. So I do think that he has, maybe he's not as much of a dark horse as some of the other two that we mentioned, but I don't think he's necessarily a favorite, and he's certainly not a lock to make the NHL roster. So slight dark horse, I guess, for Ryan Shea. Let's move over and talk about some goaltenders, because it is goalie week on NHL social media. So we figured we'd participate in this a little bit. The Penguins have had some very good goaltenders throughout their organization's history. Hall of Famer Tom Barrasso, as well as future Hall of Famer Marc-Andre Fleury. They headline the list. Recent years haven't gotten the best out of that position. So what we're going to do here is rank where Tristan Jarry and Alex Nedeljkovic, the Penguins goaltending tandem, stands among the Metropolitan Division. Let me first read you down the tandems that we have here in the Metro Division, and then I'll let you place them first, and then we'll talk about where the placement is and who they should be above. You have Philadelphia, cross-state rivals, Ivan Fedotov, Samuel Ersson. A lot of unproven commodities in that goaltending tandem. Washington, Charlie Lindgren and Logan Thompson. Columbus has Elvis Merzlikins and Daniil Tarasov. New Jersey, brand new, based on compared to last season, has Jacob Markstrom and Jake Allen. Carolina has Frederick Anderson and Pyotr Kochetkov. The Islanders have Sorokin and Varlamov, and the New York Rangers have Igor Shesterkin and Jonathan Quick for a second consecutive season. So when you hear all of those names, where do you think Pittsburgh's tandem of Tristan Jarry, Alex Nedeljkovic stands going into this season?
I would say higher than maybe you'd expect, because I'm taking both into account here. And I'm just trying to look at this list and quickly pick a spot. I mean, Shesterkin and Jonathan Quick got to go first. There's no doubt about it, because that's, just Igor Shesterkin, one of the top goalies in the NHL right now, and future Hall of Famer Jonathan Quick, who stood on his head last year, almost stole the starting role in the early portions of the season last year. That's far and away the easy choice for number one. Columbus is going to be last just because Elvis Merzlikins doesn't have the same pop he used to, and Tarasov is unproven. I want to say Philly's going to be down low too because unproven talent and a very bad situation for their goaltending. I don't know about Jersey. That's going to be tough. I'd say if I'm looking at it right now, the Penguins probably have off the jump the third or fourth top because Ned did pretty well last year.
Mm-hmm.
And Jari has the potential to be a good goalie still, right? Right? Does he really?
He's shown the ceiling, right? That's what we always argue whenever we're like, well, is he that bad? Because he's shown the ceiling of being a all-star on multiple occasions. It wasn't one fluke. On multiple occasions, he's had a great start to the season. Even last year, when he wasn't an all-star, he had a great start to the season. And then, as we typically see, New Year's happens. He does a little bit too much partaking, and all of a sudden, the back half of his season is crap.
Yeah, and the further I look at it, the further down. I'm just trying to look at it on my list. I never numbered them. They keep sliding down because Washington's is interesting. They're probably not as big. I probably would sit them sixth because Logan Thompson has to sort of prove himself, and maybe it's still Charlie Lindgren's net there. It's a new move. Yeah. It's interesting, but maybe Pittsburgh's sitting fifth because you can't deny Ilya Sorokin, even if the veteran Varlamov, who might be losing steps, is his backup. Markstrom's a question mark. I get he is, usually a perennial Vezina candidate, but something about last season, I don't know if he'll have to bounce back from that. And Freddie Kochetkov is another interesting one. Maybe it's so hard to discuss goalies, especially in the Metro. There are so many good goalies in the Metro that it's tough to place them. I'm going to stick with the Penguins at fourth. Don't ask for the rest of the rankings.
Yeah, I have the Penguins at fifth. Whenever I look at this, I think Carolina, if Anderson is healthy, him and Kochetkov, I think, is a better tandem. I have New Jersey at third because I have less questions about Jacob Markstrom. I think he's going to have a good year behind that restructured New Jersey Devils defense. And I think having Jake Allen as your backup, people forget because Jake Allen has been up in Montreal the last couple of years, which hasn't had a lot of visibility because they haven't been a good team. But Jake Allen's been a pretty good goaltender the last couple of seasons. Him in a pure backup role behind a guy like Markstrom, who can be that workhorse, I think is going to be a match made in heaven. And then, like you mentioned, the two New York teams, their goaltending is, 3 of the 4 of them are Russian. And we know that right now is the age of Russian goaltenders being the best in the NHL. Shesterkin is there. Sorokin had an off season last year and still had a .909 save percentage. I would imagine he doesn't repeat that performance. I would imagine he gets back to being his old self. And Varlamov, even though he's older, he's the ageless wonder. Like, you remember, he is probably, and unless I'm missing something, him or Quick have to be the most veteran of the goaltenders in this division, and they're still among the best. Like, Jonathan Quick had a little bit of a resurgence after getting out of LA. It seemed to get a little stale out there on the south coast of California, but he looked really good last year in a blue shirt. And Varlamov has looked really good, really his entire career when he's been with the New York Islanders. So it's hard for me to put the Penguins, especially with Jari and the question marks surrounding him going into the season, above any of those other 4. Now, when it comes to who they are above right now, Merzlikins, like you mentioned, has kind of cooled off. Tarasov is unproven. Samuel Ersson of Philadelphia is interesting because he had a couple of runs last year where he was really productive for them. But again, can he do it? And can he and the absolute monster of a man in Ivan Fedotov do it for a full season as that tandem? There's question marks there as well. So I think Nedeljkovic actually helps the Penguins more than Jari in this situation, because Nedeljkovic against some of these other backups, I would take. Jari against some of these other starters, it's a much more difficult conversation. So I have them in fifth. I think it's a toss-up between them and Washington. They could be sixth.
Now, see, that's where it gets interesting because the Penguins have the bonus of they're not solid. They're not necessarily standing out amongst a pack of this, but they have 2 starters, right? They have 2 starting caliber goalies if things are going well. Columbus obviously doesn't have that. Philly might have that. I think the thing with Samuel Ersson is that he just got thrust into a very bad situation last year. He wasn't supposed to be I don't remember if it was supposed to be, he wasn't supposed to be on the NHL roster, but he definitely wasn't supposed to be the starter for that long whatsoever.
Mhm.
And he did what he could, and he did fantastic for a brutal situation. I just don't know if it can continue, especially if Fedotov can be as good as advertised. By the way, we were discussing the Calder Trophy before recording. There's another name to throw into the conversation if he pops off.
Yeah.
I think Washington, Charlie Lindgren, and Logan Thompson is just it's too many. What's the rest of your team going to look like to help you out here?
Well,
And better, but still.
yeah.
But that's another team that's got two starters. Shesterkin and Quick, two starters. Sorokin is definitely the starter, but Varlamov can spot start pretty nicely.
Mm-hmm.
And then Carolina famously had three starters for a long time, so now they're down to two.
Yeah.
So it gets tough. I could see the Penguins getting an edge on some of these guys because they have two quote unquote, if you will, I won't label them as starters, but two quote unquote starters that would have starting roles on a number of teams in the league.
Yeah, on the Pittsburgh-Washington front, I think the ceiling is higher when you're looking at just goaltending.
Mm-hmm.
Team defense-wise, Washington proved late last season that they are far and above superior to the Penguins in team defense and protecting the net front and protecting their goaltenders. So if it comes down to who I believe will have a better season just in general, when it comes to numbers, statistics, probably Washington, because they're probably going to see a lot less opportunities and chances from opposition because Spencer Carberry hammered that home. They basically became the New York Islanders with a little bit more flair last year, especially late down the season when they were giving up 13 shots on goal, trying to narrow down and get that final playoff spot. So team defense is better in Washington. So that lends me to believe that potentially they're going to have the better season. But I think when you're looking purely at goaltenders, the ceiling's a little bit higher with Jari and Nedeljkovic. So I have them at 5, but I think it's shaky ground for the Penguins in that. I think the point being here is, the Penguins aren't going to win with goaltending alone this year. Certainly not in their own division. When you look at the Eastern Conference as a whole, that definitely gets put into picture even more. When you look at a team like Boston, who still has Jeremy Swayman, if he signs a contract, I mean, we don't know how that's going to end. You have Sergei Bobrovsky coming off of a Stanley Cup championship. So there's a lot of good goaltending in the Eastern Conference. The Penguins are going to need, as with everything else on this team, the Penguins are going to need to have a full 23-man roster that is contributing night in and night out. Even the 3 guys up in the press box, they're going to have to contribute night in and night out. But let's close things off by talking about a new member of the Pittsburgh Penguins, somebody who we've talked about in each of the last couple of shows, because it's probably the most exciting thing that's happened all month. It's probably the most exciting thing that's happened all summer, considering some of the earlier moves this offseason. Rutger McGroarty spoke with the media for the first time yesterday. And my main takeaway, we'll get into all of our takeaways, but my main takeaway is it was a, quote, happy to be here fest. It was I'm very excited for this new opportunity. I'm excited to be in Pittsburgh. I'm excited to play with Sidney Crosby. If it ever happens, he says, as if it's not a foregone conclusion that he's going to play at some point on a line with Sidney Crosby. But outside of that, I thought he had a couple of interesting comments and a couple of newsworthy takes and quotes that came out of that 7.5 minutes at UPMC Sports Complex up in Cranberry. But let me ask you first, because I gave my thoughts yesterday on Tip of the Iceberg Live. What were your thoughts on McGroarty's first press conference?
I mean, nothing stuck out to me. There was, like you said, it was I'm just happy to be here. It's a hockey person trying to answer hockey questions. Yeah. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to contribute. Happy to, get into a new situation and excited to get into a new situation. One of the quotes that got me was off the jump was him saying, whenever he was asked about the winning culture here, that he likes winning and he wants to win and is excited to have that opportunity here. Buddy, have you seen the standings the last 2 seasons? First, as a joke. Secondly, I get what he's saying. It's there has been definitely a culture of winning in Pittsburgh for the last 16 seasons, 17, 18 seasons, 20 years, essentially, with Sidney Crosby in the lineup. There has been that, that drive of you're here to win. You're here to be successful. And it's going to be up to him to help bring that back a little bit. And And I think that one stuck out mostly because obviously the way the Penguins have gone the last few years, it hasn't been as successful. It hasn't been full of winning. But that's the fact that the culture of winning is still sticking around, that aura and that's still here. That means that he feels it. He feels there's something that can happen here, and he's going to try and continue being a successful player. He's going to have to do it in Pittsburgh now. So I'd say that quote stuck out because it sounded weird whenever you consider where the Penguins have been, but knowing that with Crosby still around and still kicking, with Malkin still around, with Letang, Carlson, like we just discussed, the goaltenders, they can pick it up. There can be a chance of winning here, and he can be a huge part of it.
Yeah, and I think that's something that it seems like he's an insanely competitive guy.
Yep.
And I feel like he's taking that as a challenge. Like, hey, they haven't won the last 2 years. I'm 20 years old. He's won in Michigan. He's won in World Juniors, was the captain of the gold medal team, which we've talked about in 2024. So this is a guy that is insanely competitive. And it seems like he's taking that as a challenge. Like, this is a winning culture. Seems like we haven't done that the last couple of years. I think it's about time that they start doing it again. Now, again, can he carry them to that? That's a lot to ask a 20-year-old. It helps when you have some Hall of Famers on the roster, obviously, is including the biggest winner in all of like hockey history in Sidney Crosby. But I did like the confidence of saying, listen, I'm a winner. I like winning things, and this is where I want to do it. And I think that there's a culture here to do it. So I liked that as well. My big takeaways, one, threw it in there, comfortable playing on both wings. Mike Sullivan will absolutely love that. Whether they actually test that out, whether they actually utilize that, different story, especially with a young guy. You kind of want to protect him a little bit. But saying that he's comfortable on both wings, that's good. Something I hadn't thought about. I thought he was left wing center. If he can get in there on the right side, especially considering, the one other player that the Penguins have been not rumored to be going after, but we've talked about potentially looking at as a target, and Nick Robertson, who's a left winger, it helps, especially if you trade Rickard Rakell, that you essentially have that guy that can be top six, bottom six, left wing, right wing. It's always nice to have a guy like that. And the other one, he's playing in the prospects tournament. Braden Yeager was slotted to play in it, so essentially he just takes Yeager's spot on the roster. So with that, we're going to see him playing in some game action in 2 weeks for the Pittsburgh Penguins. The question I have for you, Horwat, is who do you want to see him play with that weekend? Who do you want him to be on a line with that weekend whenever they go up to Buffalo?
Oh, that's tough. There's some good names too. Both Vasily Ponomarev and Vili Koivunen. By the way, mind you, I haven't looked at the roster of who's playing, so if I say a name that's not on there, shout it out, and I will excuse myself. But so far, those two, Vasily Ponomarev and Vili Koivunen, are both obvious choices to center McGroarty in the situation, because all three of those names are guys that can be important pieces to the Penguins' future. Getting in that mindset of growing a chemistry now, getting it in early, is a great way to start that sort of process of looking to what the future can be. Tristan Brose is also an interesting name if that lines up, because Tristan Brose, I mean, not that he's a dark horse to make the lineup or anything, but it definitely need to keep an eye on going into the following seasons. This year may not come for him, but next year could be a big year for him, especially if he takes his first run at professional hockey in the AHL and succeeds and and excels. Starting it with Rutger McGroarty at this prospect camp or at this prospect tournament could be huge.
Yeah, Tristan Brose is the guy that I circled here. One, because they're both college hockey guys. Brose obviously going Minnesota to Denver, winning a national championship last year. McGroarty coming out of Michigan. And two, I mean, they've already been on the ice together, right? Earlier this week, it was Brose, it was McGroarty. Throw in Sergei Murashov was out there. Throw in Cody Glass was out there. Glass won't be at the prospect tournament, but those other three will. So maybe you throw Brose and McGroarty, similar styles, coming from a similar background in college hockey. And then the other player I want to see, who's kind of a Prospects Challenge MVP last year, opened a lot of eyes, was still pretty good in training camp, and then kind of faded away as the season got underway. Avery Hayes. Maybe put Avery Hayes on that right side. Hayes, Brose, and McGroarty. I'd like to see that. I understand they play the same wing, but I'd love to see McGroarty take a few shifts with Tanner Howe, because those two, the way they play the game together, it would be similar to, they're not fighters, but it'd be like the Penguins version of the Bash brothers in this tournament. So I'd like to see those two play, get a little chippy, get under the skin of the opponents, and put in a bunch of goals. So if they can get them on the ice at the same time, maybe some power play opportunities, I'd love to see those two share the ice. So that's one thing I'm looking at. But I think Bros is the big one that I'm circling, as him and McGroarty should probably, share the ice a lot, especially if you're looking for Bros to come up and eventually be a big piece as a center iceman.
It's a fantastic pick too. It's like you mentioned it, the connection of NCAA hockey, which breeds them into a similar style, breeds them into similar mindsets. They'll be able to read each other off that. If I'm not mistaken, I might be. Didn't Denver go through Michigan on their way to winning the championship? I could be wrong about that. But I remember Michigan losing in heartbreaking fashion to someone, and I know Tristan Bros scored 2 overtime game winners in that tournament. I just forget who they were against.
Yeah, I know he did it against BU and Macklin Celebrini.
Yep.
But let me look and see who else they went through. They went through Boston College in the final, BU in the semifinal, Cornell in the second round, and Massachusetts in the first round. So Michigan was on the other side of the bracket and were eliminated by Boston College in the Frozen Four.
Got it. That's what it was. Okay. But, both playing in that tournament too, it's being around each other, getting to know each other in that sort of sense. It's a good little partnership that could be, for the Penguins down the line, pretty fruitful, pretty successful.
The last thing I'll mention about this, and this wasn't from the press conference, this came out earlier today from NHL Jersey Numbers. Josh Getzoff of the Penguins obviously retweeted it. He's expected to wear number 2. When you look at number 2 throughout the history of Penguins hockey, there's 22 of them. The first person to ever wear it, Leo Boivin. There's a name. Other names that have worn it over the years. Phil Bourque for a season. Before he became the old 2-9er, he was just the old 2 in 1984. Jimmy Pack, Joseph Melikar, Hal Gill, Matt Niskanen, and most recently, Chad Ruhwedel. What are your thoughts on Rutger McGroarty donning the number 2 potentially in his first season as a member of the Pittsburgh Penguins?
It's a lot of defensemen there.
Well, it's a single digit number.
It's fascinating to see. It's interesting because I think Will Smith with San Jose is also wearing number 2. And it's weird seeing forwards. It's like football nowadays. And the NHL has never really had that rule anyway, or that mindset of your number has to correlate with your position, this, that, the other. The only thing that's ever correlated to in hockey is the goalies with number 1. Forwards traditionally have not worn number 2. 3 and up we've seen. 4 and up maybe. But this is a new little wrinkle that is going to be fascinating. Will Smith's wearing number 2 in San Jose. Rutger McGroarty might be wearing number 2 in Pittsburgh. It'll be interesting. It'll take the eyes some getting used to. I'm still getting used to linemen wearing number 6 in football. So
that doesn't happen as much. I mean, defensive linemen, yes. It'll be weird seeing like Patrick Queen wearing number 6.
See, it's fascinating, and I like it. I like the idea of just who cares. It's like in the grand scheme of things, who cares? It is just a number. Like let the guys wear whatever they want, wherever they play.
That's what it is. We are trained to be like, that doesn't fit. That's not where that's supposed to be. Like that's number 2 is supposed to be a big like Hal Gill, like 6'8", and just laying on the ground, getting pucks smashed into his face by slap shots and being like, all right, that's cool. Like, all right. I mean, hey.
I forget who it is. I think it's Seth Rohrbach always tweets it whenever a new number comes in like that. He's like, my eyes are going to need to adjust to watching. I forget who it was exactly. There's like one where it's like a defense was taking a forward number. Why is so-and-so pinching so much? Oh, because it's somebody else. That's, how often we're going to think that whenever we see Rutger McGroarty down below the goal line or the net front. Like, what's Chad Ruhwedel doing down there? Oh, wait. It's going to take some adjusting and getting used to. But I'm fascinated by seeing, just the freeness of numbers. If it's not a legitimate written rule, I want to see a skater wear number 1. I really do. I do. I don't care. I think it's fascinating.
Like at the end of the day, it doesn't bother me at all. But it is, when I saw that, I was like, oh no, like that's going to be so strange and so hard to get used to. That's like Matt Grzelcyk wore number 24. And I know Ty Smith wore 24 as well. But like seeing 24 as a defensive number, I'm like, I don't know what I expect, but 24 is not it. Like It just seems like a strange number. But again, wear what you want. 2 is weird. The most interesting of that list is that Phil Bourque wore 2. I forgot about that. That was literally his rookie season, I believe, in 1984. So that one was interesting. But, Jimmy Pack, Stanley Cup champion with Pittsburgh. Hal Gill, I believe, Stanley Cup champion in 2009. I'd have to go back and check.
Yes.
So a couple Stanley Cup champions to wear that number. Chad Ruhwedel, beloved in Pittsburgh. Good old Rudy. So we'll see if good things come for Rutger McGroarty, and maybe, just maybe, he becomes the best 2 in Penguins history, right? That's what you're hoping for.
He's got a hill to climb.
He's got a gill to climb.
Oh.
But I think on that note, with the poor pun, we should close this one out. But thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of The Tip of the Ice-Burgh as Horwat slumps into his chair, hating me very much so, and very happy probably that he doesn't have to talk to me for a couple of days. But thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh or anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next week when September and hockey truly starts to come back.